imagine that right now you're feeling a bit like Alice, tumbling down the rabbit hole? Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. It is this feeling that has brought you to me. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. But I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people.
And now, welcome to another episode of Down the Rabbit Hole. Here's your host from federaljack.com. It's Popeye.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition. It is Tuesday, October 22nd, 2013. If you didn't hear the last 2 hours I just did with Joe, I suggest you go back in Joe's archive later on and pull it. I will grab the show and I'll throw it up on YouTube and in the archive section on Federal Jack over the next few days when I get a chance. So it was a really good broadcast. Joe's coming on Thursday. We're going to be getting into religion, but not so much I guess religion / hardcore ideologies a little bit. We're going to be covering it, and it'll probably be a show that will, spur emotions in people. It usually does. I know I put a post on Facebook the other day that it was like kicking a hornet's nest, which is what. I wanted to start conversation, but the point is, I wanted to do a show with Joe about it, and he's coming on Thursday. So, and if you didn't get a chance to listen to the last 2 hours I did with him, go check it out in the archives. Anyway, there's a few things I want to get into tonight. One of them is going to take up a good chunk of time, but I want to. I have a piece of audio that I've been looking for. It took me about a month and a half to find it because I have way too many old hard drives. And I had to go through all of the hard drives to find it. I have since now, I spent about 3 days moving everything over. I had to get a few bigger drives, and I've been consolidating things, so everything's a little bit more organized. But I had to find a piece of audio for you guys that I've been wanting to play. It serves as an example. And the example that it serves to show and set for everybody is that what you think you know about your government, you don't know anything at all. And if you think that crazy, kooky conspiracy theorists are lying when they tell you, oh, there's FEMA camps or there's plans for martial law or anything like that, well, I'm going to show you something from our northern cousins, which we have a lot of listeners that tune in from Canada. But I'm going to show you something from our northern cousins for those of you listening here in the States. Our cousins to the north that we often say, oh, they're much nicer than we are, right? The reason I wanted to use this is because it shows you that if they were doing this, and this was a while ago, can you imagine what Canada is doing now and what the United States is doing? Because Canada takes its cues from us and from England. So if they were doing this, what were we doing? Get my point? And it's a little history lesson back in time. So I for the Canadians anyway who don't know this, and I've been wanting to find this piece of audio and I couldn't find it. It was a I guess you could say a documentary, about a 40-minute documentary aired by the CBC, and this was I guess at least 2 years, 2.5, maybe even 3 years ago. There's a listener / activist who lives up in Canada. I've known for a few years. She's actually her name's Kristen. She's actually one of the people responsible for pushing me to do radio. She was one of the people that pushed me to start doing my own radio show years and years ago. Anyway, she used to record stuff for me that I couldn't get down here in the States, and she would send it to me via Skype. She would digitally record it and send it to me. So she sent me this documentary on a Canadian program called PROFUNC. And I had no idea what it was. And she said, "Have you ever heard of this?" She said, "I just found out about this and it blew my mind." And, she looked into it more, and it's just the stuff that she started to uncover, she was blown away by. And I started looking a little bit further into it myself, and I was just, I guess, shocked, because I always, this is, I guess, maybe an American myth or whatever, but, you're always told, our cousins to the north, the Canadians, they're so much better behaved, you know what I mean? They're more, I don't want to say laid back, but they're a little bit more relaxed. You Americans are more apt to get, in brawls. We're the unruly Southern cousin that it's fun to go get drunk with and hang out with, during the summer or whatever. And it's amazing, because over the course of, I would say, well, at least, since 9/11, definitely, but I would say the past about 6 years, the past 6 years, 7 years, there's been this huge amping up and ramping up of even the Canadians the police up there acting just like the cops down here. And perhaps it was a systemic problem much longer. It's just getting more light, just like it is here. But it's getting out of control here too. So you can see it's ramping up there. Anyway. This program, PROFUNC, goes back to the Cold War era, and it was running for about 30 years, from the 50s to the 80s. So if they were doing this back then, if they were doing this kind of stuff from the 50s, all the way back then, monitoring people, writing lists, the audio you're going to hear is kind of, it'll blow you away, especially if you think that this stuff's not possible. It's just another example. It's not. It's not it's not a radio show host with a bullhorn jumping up and down on a desk, screaming and yelling at the top of his lungs about FEMA camps and martial law here in the States. And you can go, "Oh, well, that guy, look at his behavior." No. This is the CBC admitting that there was a Canadian program, I guess you could call it, called PROFUNC. And in case of martial law or whatever, they would go around rounding people up. Well, if they were doing it in the 50s, you don't think they have a modern-day version of it, especially after 9/11? Just because it was ended in the 80s doesn't mean anything. And what's interesting is this documentary, now I have to figure out the year it was, but it was shot right before the Canadian G20. I would say I would maybe within a few months, because they mention it in here. They mention the G20. They say with the upcoming G20 in Canada, blah 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 blah. So this was before what we now know and what we've seen at the G20, right? The martial law scenario. They were attacking people. I've interviewed Dan Dix, the guy who made a great film called Into the Fire, if I remember correctly. Great film. Yeah, Dan's a great activist. They arrested a guy. He wasn't even doing anything. Wasn't even a protester. He had one leg, and they threw him in a cell, and they took his leg from him, and they abused him. He didn't even do anything wrong. He wasn't even a protester. But hey, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So guess what? You get treated like a piece of cattle. That ought to show you that there's no discernment. It's indiscriminate. So that maybe there's a bigger agenda at work, huh? People should pay attention to that. Anyway, this documentary was filmed and aired, or put together and aired right before the Canadian G20. And then we all saw how the Canadian G20 turned out. That like I said, that turned out to be a mess. So keep that in mind when you're listening to this and I play the audio. But it's real. And I know it's kind of scary. I know, oh my God, really? The government would do that? Yes, the government would do that. But if you know the government, let's call it the bully. If the bully is going to come beat you up or, has planned to do something bad, if you expose the bully to everybody, then the bully doesn't really have any power because now the bully is shown for what the bully is, just a bully. And then people lose respect and everything else. And that's what we need to do with the government on a bigger scale. We need to expose this type of thing. That way it can't be, because this type of activity can't be allowed to just go unchallenged and unchecked and at least not talked about at the very least. I'm willing to bet there's a ton of people that don't even know what PROFUNC is. Never heard of it. You'll hear in the documentary, the guy that was, there was a guy that was, he was an attorney general in one of the provinces, and he was on the list, getting watched by the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Wow! The whole time, all the while, he was in this position of government. He was being watched before that, and then when he got in a position of government, he was being watched still. So it goes to show you that it's not just crazy, kooky conspiracy theorists that should be worried about this stuff. It's everybody. I mean, if you say something out loud in a store, because now they have, see something, say something here in the States. Say you say something in the store that somebody considers to be crazy or radical. You're standing online talking to your wife, or you're standing online talking to your husband, and you turn around and you say something like, you see an article or something because they have the newspapers right there by the checkout. You say something, and you say something like, "Oh, I don't know, this damn government can't get their stuff together with Obamacare. President's a jerk off, whatever," something to that effect, right? Say someone in line hears you and they take offense to that, and they go, "Okay, see something, say something." This happens all the time, okay? So then, they call the authorities and they make up a story about you and you get rounded up. Happened in Nazi Germany, happened in Soviet Russia. It'll happen here. The system will be abused. Not only by the people that are in the system doing the abusing, right, the oppressors, but there will be people out in the everyday life that will abuse it. I mean, every time that they've ever done, even when we invaded Iraq, and we set up our little martial law system, half the people, you can go ask the prison guards at Abu Ghraib or any of these other prisons over there. Ask them, not the ones that are idiots, not the ones that try to act tough, but which is only like a very small percentage. Most of them, ask anybody that really served any time there. Ask them, who were the people that you guys rounded up? Half the people that were rounded up were people that were turned in by their neighbors or stuff because the neighbor had like a personal a vendetta against them. It could have been years before the invasion, but they took advantage of the situation. So you're going to have that too. And this type of activity, lists people's names on it for rounding them up and stuff, well, that's ripe for misuse and abuse. But, that's what happens when you want to be tyrannical. So obviously it goes to show you that this isn't about protecting you from the boogeyman. It has nothing to do with your personal safety when they want to lock you up. I mean, you're the terrorist in their eyes. Get it? Got it? Good. All right. So, I want to get into PROFUNC. And the reason I'm going to play this is because, it'll take us back in time, educate some Canadians that tune in about what really went on in their history, and hopefully they'll research it and educate other people. But not only that, it serves as an example that if Canada, again, was doing this from the 50s to the 80s, what do you think the United States and the UK were doing and other countries were doing? But, we affect Canada. Remember, they take a lot of their cues from us in the UK. So what were we doing here in the States? What are we doing today? That's even scarier. What are we doing today? I'm not trying to frighten you or make you look over your shoulder, but we need. This is, it's natural human instinct to want to be wary of things like this, right? Well, you need to know about it. You need to know about the dangers. I'm not going to give you some fictitious danger and tell you Bin Laden's hiding in your toilet or in your closet and that he's the terrorist, because he's not wearing an Armani suit. The real terrorists wear Armani suits, Okay, let's get that straight. Anyway, let's get to PROFUNC, the Canadian Plan for Martial Law. I know, Canadian Plan for Martial Law. There's a lot of people that, Canadians, martial law? Yeah, check this out.
Out of the past, a secret plan to lock up thousands of Canadians whose crime was their support for radical ideas. From the Fifth Estate and Radio-Canada, revelations about a program so draconian it even shocked a politician supposedly in charge of it.
I'm just appalled to hear that. I just can't believe that had any government authorization behind it.
We're just after 12:30, and I'm your host today, Stefan Christoph.
A tale of paranoid security from yesterday that resonates for activists today.
CSIS, knocking on the door, pushing themselves into the apartment, insisting on speaking to my friend.
This is the public face of national security. A public show of force. The power of the state deployed to maintain public order, calculated to impress and, if necessary, frighten. But this is mostly theater. Today and throughout history, the real security is going on unseen and frequently unsupervised.
Police, open the door!
And when it goes too far, as we will see tonight, it can be exponentially more frightening than any public spectacle. Good evening and welcome to the Fifth Estate. I'm Lyndon McIntyre. Our story tonight is about the work of national security you hardly ever hear of, let alone see paraded ostentatiously in the street. It's work conducted for the most part by undercover cops and spies. It's about a shocking program that we'd never heard about until recently, a secret scheme that was in place for more than 30 years. It's a story about how people in authority were prepared to use fear to justify repression in the name of public safety. It was 1950, peacetime, but war was high on the agenda of a secret gathering in Ottawa. Government officials are briefed by senior officers of the RCMP, then the leading agency of national security. They have a plan of breathtaking audacity. In the event of a crisis, a preemptive strike against people deemed to be the enemies of Canadian democracy. 5 years earlier, this man, Igor Guzenko, had fled the Soviet embassy in Ottawa with files revealing a sophisticated communist spy network throughout the United States and Canada.
You are Mr. Igor Guzenko?
That's right.
And you are the man who exposed part of the Canadian-Soviet espionage system in 1945?
That's correct.
Guzenko and the hood he wore in public seemed to offer confirmation that the world was full of sinister conspiracies, that the communists had fanatically faithful friends in Canada, and that the world was but a blink away from another global war. By the early 50s, the doomsday scenario was easy to believe. The outbreak of war in Korea looked like a rehearsal for World War III, which would be a war between democracy and Soviet dictatorship, a war with the potential to annihilate the human race.
The communists were elusive and hard to find, and the Canadians were given the task of chasing after them.
The prospect of a war that could be fought with nuclear weapons gave renewed legitimacy to espionage.
Well, there was a very great fear of the war between the Cold War becoming a hot war again. You know, it was very intense.
Robert Kaplan, who would one day become Canada's Solicitor General, officially the Minister of Spies, came of age in the Cold War era.
The atmosphere was so different in those days. You know, people were really, the public was scared of a communist threat.
Fear can generate extreme reactions, An American politician named Joseph McCarthy shrewdly demonstrated in the early 50s that the fear of communists had huge political potential.
Another general who protects communists is not fit to wear that uniform, General.
Question is, have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
The American public for years would tolerate the public persecution of people tainted with the accusation that they were communists or soft on communism.
I remember in my high school back in the early 50s, we'd come to school and we'd sit in our classroom and listen to the McCarthy hearings on the radio.
Whether you are or have ever been a member of the Communist Party.
Horror with a very strong disapproval. We just thought it was wrong.
If Kaplan was alarmed by what was happening in Washington, he'd have been appalled by what was going on at home. In August 1950, it would turn out that Canadians were no less vulnerable to fear. As Canadians nervously observed the unfolding public witch hunt in the U.S., the government of Canada approved a secret and potentially more menacing assault on civil liberties. The plan was called PROFUNC, targeting prominent functionaries in groups believed to be pro-Soviet. It was a strategy of breathtaking ambition, the targeting across the land of people with communist affiliations, sympathies, even family connections. And it was approved in its broadest outlines by the Government of Canada. It was the brainchild of the RCMP Commissioner, Stuart Taylor Wood. He'd led the National Police Force for 13 tough years, from 1938 through World War II till the spring of 1951. He had a not surprising interest in national security and a preoccupation with identifying and, if necessary, neutralizing spies. This is a letter to the Minister of Justice in February 1950. The Commissioner sets out his master plan: to spy on and, when necessary, to intern 16,000 suspected communists and maybe even 50,000 of their sympathizers. Internment. It's a word with a lot of nasty baggage, most of it derived from excesses in distant places: South Africa, Siberia, the ghettos of Eastern Europe. Canada has its own dark history of internments: Ukrainians, Italians, Japanese, Canadians, in the early 40s, communists. But PROFUNC was unique in Canada, not just for its scale, but for targeting Canadians for political beliefs that were legal. To this day, the lists of potential internees compiled by the RCMP remain a secret. But we now know that it didn't take much to get on the list of targets: party membership, family connections, associations that suggested sympathy for Marxist doctrine qualified thousands of Canadians for indefinite incarceration. And from documents we've seen, we can for the first time identify the types of people that the Mounties had in mind.
The best part is, and you'll hear them say this later, that the reason that they can't have access to the files now and who was on what lists to be rounded up, it's national security. Really. I thought it was only in case of a communist threat. No, you can't know who we were going to round up. It's national security. How is it national security? I thought the program ended in the 80s.
Robert Mendel Laxer made no secret of his politics. He was a communist, a full-time organizer for the Labour Progressive Political Party, a legal entity in Canada. He lived with his wife and 3 young children on a quiet, dead-end street in a working-class Toronto neighborhood. Growing up, the son of a committed communist wasn't always easy. James Laxer, Robert Laxer's son.
I'm about 10, 11, and the teacher, she says, today we're going to do a very exciting thing. We're going to all learn what each other's fathers do for a living. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Maybe recess will come along, which she'll never get to me. She finally gets to me, and I stand up, and Jimmy, what does your father do for a living? And I say, I don't know.
He might have said his dad had been a soldier, served overseas in World War II. But above all else, Dad was a Red, and it bothered him.
It felt awful. First of all, I was very adept at figuring out, even as a child, that while there was clearly support for the Communist Party in downtown Toronto in this period, that most people hated the Communist Party. I knew that. That Canadian politics at the federal level, in my opinion, is dysfunctional.
Jimmy Laxer grew up to become a prominent academic and author and a committed social democrat. He has no time for communist ideology or rhetoric, but he still has traumatic memories of childhood among communists in a time of strident anti-communism.
I felt deeply threatened. I felt that the world I lived in was a very insecure world. The message was, and I got this by the time I was 3 or 4, was that the police were bad. The police were our enemy. The police were out there to do us harm.
I'm going to pause it right there because the break is sneaking up on us. Interesting so far, huh? They had lists of people they were going to round up. And yes, I understand it was the communist scare. We still have that today, do we not? The terrorist scare. Oh my God, the terrorists are going to come get us. Run, run. Makes you wonder who's on lists. We'll be right back. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. So, PROFUNC, the Canadian police state. Wow. And again, they won't release the names on the lists. Lists over 30 years old. Actually, well, now, I mean, if it ended in the 80s, it would have been 30 years. Add another 20-something years onto it. So, going back 50 years, 60 years. Why is this national security? Why are people not allowed to have access to the names on these lists? Unless maybe perhaps the people that they associate with or are related to might be spooked by it, and you wouldn't want that because maybe you're still monitoring them because they could be considered threats to the state. You'll hear later on where there was the program ended up getting shut down because it was old people that were older Canadian citizens that were trying to travel back and forth into the United States, and suddenly after 9/11 they weren't able to get into the States because they were considered a threat to national security because their name had been put on this list, and this old list was used as a what do you call it? The list was used as a I guess you could say kind of like what they want to do with Obamacare and everything else. They want to have all the records, and they were able to go back and pull this old list, and people were not able to get into the States. And I mean, this goes back where people weren't into. I shouldn't say it was before 9/11. They weren't able to get into the States before 9/11 because of this stuff. Can you imagine people now after 9/11 if this was still on? Say they were on a list. And the government doesn't want to. Again, the government doesn't want to give you the names on these lists because they say it's for national security. But if they were no longer national security threats, right? Then you see my point. So these names that were on a list 50 years ago, their family members or those names could very well be on a list today. Again, after 9/11, and those very same people would have the problem of getting across the border now because back then it was easier. It was the 80s. You didn't have the atmosphere of fear that the atmosphere of fear was different, I should say. There was an atmosphere of fear, but the atmosphere of fear was different. Now we have to have checkpoints and everything else. I'm willing to bet these people would not be able to get across the border now. And there are probably people, Canadian citizens, that are affected by being on these lists. But I thought that police states don't exist, and that stuff is all conspiracy theorist chicanery, right? You see my point? So if a list from the 50s was affecting people in the 80s trying to cross a border, and they're not willing to tell you now who was on those lists going back to the 50s, could people still be being affected today by the PROFUNC lists after 9/11? You see my point? Just a question. Just thought I'd raise it. Anyway, I want to get back to the audio. We're going to pick up where you were hearing one of the families who was being surveilled. One of the children, they interviewed him, and this guy, he had no clue about the PROFUNC program. In fact, he didn't like the fact that his father was a lefty, or red, I guess you would say. He didn't like the fact that he was a hardcore red and commie back then. So he was not very proud of it. And I guess growing up, you have that disdain for things that your views that your parents had or things that your parents said. And he comes to find out that their thoughts about them being surveilled and everything else were 110% accurate. The parents were right to say to the kids, "Oh, we're probably being surveilled and we're probably being watched, or we're probably on a list to be rounded up." He thought that was just talk of I don't want to say conspiracy theorists, but talk of paranoia. Because his parents were activists and Reds or whatever, right? Well, yeah, wasn't really paranoia, I guess, was it? Here we go.
In fact, the police were never far away, something that his parents would have realized intuitively. Did they ever overtly suggest to you that you got to be careful out there, that we are in a very precarious position, we are probably being watched, we are being listened to, we are being monitored, and we could be snatched at any time? Did they ever give you that?
They didn't. They gave me the feeling that all those things were true without saying you have to worry about that or you have to watch. They didn't specifically say that. But the message was very powerful.
When we come back, a message more sinister than his parents realized.
This shocks the hell out of me. To hear that this was actually in place. I didn't know that.
It was called PROFUNC. The targets prominent functionaries of groups with communist affiliations. This is what would happen all across the country in the event of international hostilities. Special teams in uniforms would show up in residential neighborhoods, take up tactical positions, await a signal from a designated control center. When that signal came, they'd move toward the target houses and their unsuspecting occupants. This is a story about national security. It's about a time when Canada was willing to strip thousands of unsuspecting Canadians of basic rights in the name of public order. It was a plan for mass internments, and it was kept alive for more than 30 years. Casa Loma in Toronto, a tourist landmark symbolic of an era of optimism and extravagance. What is less well known, it was once a designated prison for people deemed to be disloyal. Robert Laxer and his family lived just a few blocks from Casa Loma in the 50s. By all appearances, a typical Toronto family. The Laxers always knew that as communists they were being watched, but they couldn't have imagined that there was also a plan in place to lock them up. Communists and sympathizers in Toronto would be herded onto buses and confined at Casa Loma. They'd later be dispersed to more conventional detention in penitentiaries. After more than 50 years, we were able to provide Jim Laxer with details of that extraordinary national security initiative called PROFUNC.
And there was a plan in place to round up active communists, people in organizations.
You are to some extent scaring the hell out of me, but I'm not that surprised.
But let me tell you how specific it is, Jim.
Okay.
You know where you guys, where your dad and mother, who was just as red as your dad.
Absolutely.
You know where they were going to be put?
No.
Casa Loma. A couple of blocks away from home.
Yeah. They were going to be put in Casa Loma.
Yeah, and so were you.
You mean as a kid?
As a kid, and your brother and sister.
This shocks the hell out of me. To hear that this was actually in place. I didn't know that. It shocks the hell out of me because it when you say it to me, I feel a kind of anxiety that brings back the anxiety that I felt as a kid.
That the plan was never implemented is of small comfort to one who might have been a target. The details are revealing of a mindset that, unchecked, could overnight unravel hard-won civil rights. Here's what could have happened. Men would be interned in camps across the country. Women would be confined in one of two facilities. Children would be either farmed out with relatives or interned with their parents. The bland numbers represented people, catalogued and filed and with bureaucratic diligence updated by the RCMP Security Service for decades. In Ontario alone, the lists in 1953 included more than 2,000 men and women either approved or awaiting approval for internment in a time of crisis. In Manitoba, one of 600 targeted subversives was this man, Jacob Penner, a prominent city politician in Winnipeg who also happened to be a longtime communist. Jake Penner was a founder of the Communist Party of Canada. Sat on city council for nearly 30 years. His life was an open book. And still, for most of it, he was spied upon as a subversive. It started as far back as 1919 when he lived here. He had frequent visits from a man he believed to be a friend and a fellow socialist. Jake once told the so-called friend he knew that he was being spied upon. "I know a spy when I see one," he claimed. Obviously not. The friend, codenamed Agent 50, was in fact a spy for the police. In the 1940s, policemen would raid the Penner home.
I don't know what the heck they were looking for. Dangerous literature. They wouldn't know dangerous literature if it hit them on the head.
Roland Penner is Jacob Penner's son.
Was he a dangerous man?
No, absolutely not. You know, he had the slightest intention, either singly or jointly with others, of overthrowing the state by force and violence. That wasn't his character, that wasn't his mode, that wasn't his belief.
Roland Penner followed his parents' political footsteps, became a leading communist in Manitoba, and like his parents, a subject of intense police surveillance. He'd later discover just how intense when he got to see his security files.
You have got a fairly voluminous file delivered to you, and you mentioned 80% of it is blacked out. You know, any way of figuring out what it is they didn't
Well,
want
yeah,
you?
it's all the stuff that would tell me or anybody else who the informants were. That's what that's all about.
Have you any idea who the informants were?
I have some ideas, none that I can state here publicly because they're only impressions, inferences.
In the dossier, is there any reference to something called PROFUNC, P-R-O-F-U-N-C?
I don't even know what that means.
So we told him, based on documents we've been able to access. In the event of a perceived national emergency, there would have been a call to police detachments all across the country. It would signal the beginning of what they called M-Day, PROFUNC Mobilization Day, the beginning of a massive roundup of political activists.
Attention all detachments. Attention all detachments. This is a level 1 emergency.
Immediate red PROFUNC at 0600 hours, June 2nd. Repeat. Immediate red
PROFUNC at 0600 hours, June 2nd.
Police commanders had secret briefings to prepare for M-Day. At each detachment, sealed envelopes, procedures to be followed, and the names of people to be picked up and detained. The orders were impressive for their bureaucratic detail. We now know those secret envelopes were thick with forms they blandly called C-215s, arrest documents called apprehension orders, precise details on specific targets, their ages, photographs, physical descriptions, information about their cars and their houses, with particular attention to potential exits for escape. There were obviously thousands of them. Among them, this C-215 document authorizing the arrest of Jacob Penner, an elected city councilor in Winnipeg for 27 years. There was a separate order for his wife, Rose Penner. When we come back, questions about how far the long arm of PROFUNC extended. They were called the PROFUNC files. Secret dossiers on citizens considered risks to national security dating back to 1950. It was still an active part of the security apparatus in 1968, when, according to this document, an advisory committee on internments was still reviewing PROFUNC files. Files that may well have included one of the most influential politicians in the history of Canada.
In a Medicare program, inadequate health services for every man, woman, and child, irrespective of their income, their age, or their physical condition.
Tommy Douglas, former Premier of Saskatchewan, the father of public health care, and eventually this.
The greatest Canadian as decided by you is...
Tommy
But as a tireless advocate for social reform, Douglas was a likely target for a different kind of recognition. Security surveillance. What the Mounties might have learned, we can't confirm. Nearly 25 years after his death, much of his security file remains off-limits.
Jerusalem.
What is available confirms that the Mounties spied on Tommy Douglas for more than 30 years, with particular attention to connections to the peace movement and the Communist Party. Was he one of thousands of Canadians who were deemed worthy of internment in the event of international hostilities? We may never know for sure. The present-day security establishment is insisting that most of Tommy Douglas' files remain secret indefinitely. Secrecy, they say, is intrinsic to security matters. But
because if you saw the lists, perhaps you would see, maybe Tommy's gone, but associates and his family, their family, and the roots and where that stretches out to, and they can't have that because perhaps some of those people are being surveilled today. It's the only reason I could think why it could be important to national security, or maybe they're also trying to cover up the fact that what they did. But I think it's more than just covering up what they did in the past. I think it's still ongoing today.
We've been able to come up with one tantalizing document, an intelligence report based on a 1954 newspaper story with this handwritten reference, C-215. We know that C-215 refers to a detention order, a key part of Ottawa's internment plan for arresting communist sympathizers. And one of the names underlined in this supposedly incriminating document is that of Tommy Douglas. Maybe inconclusive evidence. But in another file, on another subject of police surveillance, an identical marginal reference led us to confirm the existence of an apprehension order for Roland Penner, the son of Jacob and Ruth Penner, who were also targets for possible internment. Roland Penner, like his parents, was a communist, ran for election in the 50s, which earned him his own C-215 detention document that was regularly updated for at least 20 years. Roland Penner would later join the NDP, and when the party formed the government of Manitoba in the 80s, he'd be sworn in to serve as Attorney General of the province.
I'm sitting in front of the former Attorney General of the province, and I have in my lap draft detention orders for you, your first wife, possibly your children, parents, draft detention orders that were constantly updated. How long do you think the active surveillance of you by the Mounties continued?
I've reason to believe, and I say that without being able to do anything more than make an inference from the dossier, that it continued even when I was Attorney General. Now, when it stopped, I don't know.
Does the dossier...
Lyndon, I have to advise you, it may not be stopped now. You may be under surveillance yourself.
From a security perspective, Jim Laxer, like Roland Penner, might also have been dangerous. He grew up in a dangerous environment under the influence of committed communists.
Morning.
Laxer and Penner met for the first time recently to compare experiences living in the shadow of internment.
You look like your father.
And you look like your brother.
They knew nothing about PROFUNC until we showed them documents outlining plans for the pickup and detention of individuals like them.
Now, Manitoba, you had 161 RT men. That's, enough evidence for pickup. And for women, you had 37, sufficient evidence for pickup. So this is so clearly, the thing is aimed right at us. This is Manitoba, Winnipeg is aimed at you, and Ontario, Toronto's aimed at my family.
Police, open the door! Police, ouvrez la porte!
Based on the explicit details of the documents, we can credibly imagine what could have happened. The precise instructions for the raids and the arrests. What is truly shocking is how much we learn from the particulars of how prospective internees would be treated. They'd be under military control, subject to stringent regulations, not allowed to speak to one another without permission from their guards. Page after page of rules with harsh consequences for infractions. Up to 3 days on a bread and water diet. And should they try to leave, they could be shot.
Mind you, these people hadn't been charged with anything, officially. This was in case the state decided there was an emergency, whatever that emergency may be. Remember, the president can do that to this very day here. That there were lists of people that were going to be rounded up. These people, they don't know if these people actually did anything wrong. They don't know if these people were subverting the democratic process. I do air quotes as I say that, please. But you know what I mean. They weren't subverting that. They weren't doing any of that. These people were, look at them today. One of them, Penner, the one guy, he was the guy I was talking about earlier. Attorney General in Manitoba. People really, really need to think that this, or realize that this is not a TV show or some kooky YouTube video. This is the CBC admitting, Canadian Broadcasting Network over there, that they're admitting that this is real. Now, can you imagine what we don't know about? You all know when the government finally does admit to anything, they only admit to the smallest bit, the smallest tidbit. So you can only imagine, you can only venture a guess. And what's even more messed up is the fact of how they were going to treat these people. Again, they hadn't been charged officially with anything. Were they in a court system? Did they have due process? Was there any of that? No. These people would have been rounded up and put into facilities. Their children would have been rounded up. Now, you think that they don't have those very same plans now? You think that they don't have those very same plans on the books? That's what martial law plans are. That's what Rex 84 and all that stuff is. That's when you hear people talking about, oh my God, there's lists and they're going to round people up and put them in FEMA camps. What do you think they're talking about? That's exactly what they're talking about. And if you think that, this was 50 years ago. This dates back to. So, and it didn't stop till the 80s. So if they were willing all the way up into the 80s, I was already born by then. I was already a kid growing up. So they didn't stop this till the 80s. And they were still going to treat the people the same way. What's to say that 20 some odd years later, they're not using the same guidelines for things that they would do now in the war on terror? Because now it's not communism. It's not a communist. An ism and an ist. No, it's terrorism. And terrorists. Get it? Just a different ism and a different ist. Same fear propaganda. Same type of roundup orders. Just a different ism and a different ist. Get it? Getting tired of being controlled yet? Getting tired of being manipulated yet? I know I am. That's why I can see through this stuff, because I'm not. They're not able to manipulate me like that anymore. And you too. Once you understand this, once you see this, maybe you got family up in Canada that thinks you're a crazy, kooky conspiracy theorist. You're a nutbag. Show them this. Let them hear this broadcast, or just go. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube in pieces. Maybe I'll put it up on the Federal Jack server, I think, and post it. But because I think if I put it up on YouTube, I'll just get a copyright strike from the CBC, if I remember correctly, because I used to have it up. But if you can find it. It's called PROFUNC, Enemy of the State, or I think it's called Enemy of the State PROFUNC, if I remember correctly. There's still like another 20-something minutes of it that I'm going to play next hour for you guys, so don't go anywhere. But if you want to see the documentary, I think it's up there. Like I said, I used to have it on YouTube on multiple channels, but I know on at least one of them I got a copyright strike on it, so. But that really doesn't, copyright strikes on YouTube, but those things get used like Kleenex, so anyway. Top of the hour sneaking up on us. When we get back, we'll pick it back up. Finish off the rest of the audio from Enemy of the State PROFUNC. Or as I call it, PROFUNC, the Canadian Plan for Martial Law. And again, if they had this 50 years ago, what do you think they have today? All right, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We will be back in a few short minutes. We'll pick it up right where we're leaving off, so don't go anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Down the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Popeye from FederalJack.com. It is October 22nd, 2013. Tonight I am discussing PROFUNC. It's you can actually see a documentary on the CBC about it called Enemy of the State, or Enemies of the State PROFUNC. But if you can also, you'll hear the rest of it tonight, but you can probably find it on YouTube. I don't know if it's there or not. I'm gonna try to post it up on Federal Jack for everybody. It'll just be a lot easier to do it that way so everybody can hear it. But anyway, I want to finish the rest of this audio for you and squeeze in as much as I can here in this first segment of the second hour, and then I'll end up probably being required to fit in the last 5 or maybe 4 minutes or whatever in the other segment, and then I have something else that I put together that I want to play for you all. It's about 5 minutes, but it's inspirational, and it actually came from the ending of one of my radio shows I did about two and a half weeks ago, and I cut some of the audio out, and I made an inspirational about 5-minute piece, and I put it up on YouTube, and everybody seems to like it so far, so I want to play it for you all, but I'll get into that at the end of the hour. So anyway, I want to get back to PROFUNC, Enemies of the Canadian Police State, and I rewound it about 35 seconds so you can get the full context, because I had to pause. When we were coming up on the break, I paused it, and I was talking for a few minutes about the treatment of the Canadian citizens that they were rounding up and what they were going to be put through and everything else. So I wanted to rewind it so you would get the full context of the conversation. So here we go.
Based on the explicit details of the documents, we can credibly imagine what could have happened. The precise instructions for the raids and the arrests. What is truly shocking is how much we learn from the particulars of how prospective internees would be treated. They'd be under military control, subject to stringent regulations, not allowed to speak to one another without permission from their guards. Page after page of rules with harsh consequences for infractions. Up to 3 days on a bread and water diet. And should they try to leave, they could be shot. Times change. Our insecurities evolve. By the 70s, the bogeyman of communism was replaced by the specter of homegrown terrorism. The October crisis in Quebec in 1970 provokes another startling authoritarian display.
At any cost? How far would you go with that? How far would you extend that? Just watch me.
Under the War Measures Act, nearly 500 people are swiftly rounded up from lists provided by the security establishment. Jean-Paul Brodeur took part in a subsequent review of police activity during the crisis in Quebec. Before he died recently, he confirmed for Radio-Canada that some arrests in October 1970 were based on lists of communists, possibly those PROFUNC lists, made available to Quebec police.
Ils se sont mis en contact avec la GRC et ils ont été au quartier général de la GRC à cette époque-là, qui était rue Sainte-Catherine. Ils étaient dans une petite pièce et les gens de la GRC allaient dans une autre pièce et revenaient avec des dossiers qui ne leur donnaient pas vraiment à lire, mais leur donnaient des noms.
It would come as a surprise to Daniel Waterloo to find himself among the separatists.
Tiens, je suis ici.
Yeah. Waterloo was definitely an old-school communist, an admirer of international revolutionaries, Lenin, Che Guevara. He had no sympathy for terrorism.
The FLQ, we didn't agree with bombings. It's not the way to change the world. And our principle is of changing society with the people, not against the people. If you blow bombs and you kill the neighbor's daughter, you're not going to have the woman to support your activity. It's not right. It's not the correct way.
But Waterloo was swept up anyway. Spent months in jail and never quite knew why, until now. We've been able to confirm for him that he'd been a long-standing candidate for internment under the PROFUNC operation. Daniel Waterloo was one of those thousands of Canadians for whom an apprehension order, a C-215, had been prepared and filed away for use in an emergency. Radicals, whatever cause they advocate, end up on lists. Secret lists are among the basic building blocks of national security. The trouble with lists is that the people who end up on them rarely know about them, or what the people who record their names ultimately do with them, who they share them with. And we can never know for sure what impact being on a list might have on a life or on a livelihood.
Well, again, how many people are blocked from entering the United States? That affects their lives, right? And people will go, this is what irritates me when you bring this up, because that's a valid argument right there. And somebody will go, and not even in the national security state, but one of the brainwashed people here would say, well, what's the big deal? So they couldn't travel to here. They couldn't come here on vacation. Oh, whoop-de-friggin-do. There's bigger things in the world to worry about. Well, yeah, except that their rights and their freedom to travel was just infringed for no good reason. So yeah, you should be pissed about that. And if you're not, well, then there's something wrong with you. I mean, for you to just sit around and go, well, it doesn't bother me. I mean, it's only someone's vacation getting wrecked, so they're tripping to the States from Canada was wrecked. Who cares? Well, what about if that was reversed? What if that was you or your family? Oh, well, then maybe you'd get pissed off, right? Well, then maybe you'd probably most likely be all upset and up in arms about it. Well, the government can't do that. They can't do that. What is this, America? What do you think we live in? A police state? We do live in a police state. It's the point I'm trying to get across to you. We do live in a police state. Time to wake up and smell the coffee. That way, once we wake up and admit that there's an issue, we can adjust it and fix it. It's not too late, but we need to admit that there's a problem first. That's the first step.
There was little doubt back in the 60s that Martin Loney would end up on a list. He was a student radical in British Columbia. Even when he later took a job in government, he wound up on another list, as he recently discovered.
Of more concern, however, is the presence within certain government departments and agencies, particularly CMHC, of a small group of former campus revolutionaries. This group was led until recently by Martin Loney.
This is a letter from a minister, prepared with input from the RCMP.
Loney has returned to the United Kingdom to accept a teaching position, but his disciples remain. This is deranged nonsense. I mean, the idea that people would be my disciples.
The letter identified more than 20 civil servants as Martin Loney's radical disciples, what they called an extra-parliamentary opposition, some of whom to this day prefer not to be identified. Robert Rabinovich has no problem being outed. Then a Privy Council bureaucrat in Ottawa, he would survive the stain of having been formally identified as a potential threat. But he still has no idea how he got that designation in the first place. Who was Martin Loney?
I never met him. I've never had any contact with Martin Loney. I knew of him. He was a legitimate radical. And he went on, from what I know, to university and was a radical force in university. But he wasn't a threat to the state.
Rabinovich went on to senior jobs in the public service, including a stint as president of the CBC.
That the conditions do not build on our strengths, such as news and current affairs.
But even now, he finds it sobering to think about the potential impact of an unsubstantiated allegation.
It scares me that somebody would sign it. I'm sure it was drafted by the RCMP at the time. It scares me that a minister would sign it. It is one thing for the state, through its agencies, to look into people who may be a threat to the state. It's another thing to understand the difference between a threat to the state and legitimate disagreement.
When we come back, new times, new threats, new targets. PROFUNC, brainchild of a war mentality. Initiated in 1950, it was a plan for a massive roundup of left-wing radicals in the name of national security. The program would eventually die of old age in the 80s, mercifully put to sleep by someone who didn't even know that it existed.
I, Robert Philip Kaplan, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear.
Bob Kaplan became Canada's Solicitor General in 1980. He was a Liberal MP from Toronto. He started getting calls from irate constituents, old-timers getting turned back at the U.S. border. Something about security.
And so some of these elderly people were, because of things that had happened in their past, working maybe for a communist newspaper in Toronto or being involved in the labor movement or whatever, had resulted in them being identified as a threat to the national security, and they weren't being admitted to the United States because of that.
There were enough complaints that he decided to raise the issue with the RCMP. As Solicitor General, the force was under his jurisdiction.
Well, they were saying that one of the people on the list was invited to come to Moscow to some type of annual conference, and he was invited by the embassy to go, and that this kind of proved that there was still a little bit of life left in this threat to our national security. And I remember the commissioner and I sort of looked at each other.
In 1983, he finally instructed the Mounties to stop whatever they were doing that was causing border hassles for superannuated communists and lefties. What he didn't realize was that his instructions would effectively kill a 33-year-old program that he was unaware of until we told him.
I'm just appalled to hear that, and I just can't believe that that had any government authorization behind it. And I'm very proud that my name is on the order to shut that program down.
The PROFUNC plan, with its mass arrests, its draconian detention, its orders to shoot people, seems so quaintly yesterday. But there's nothing yesterday about national security. It's everywhere today. In the 50s, it was communism. Today, it's radical Islam. It's assorted liberation movements, freelance anarchists. In the 50s, it was mostly the Mounties watching. Today, it's the RCMP, CSIS, and more than 20 departments and agencies of government with so-called national security responsibilities. It's an eclectic list. Border services and CSIS, not surprising. But how about Health Canada, food inspection, heritage, revenue? They're all engaged in the collection and the storage and the exchange of information about Canadians, often without oversight. Ian Ferrier, a musician and poet who lives in Montreal, got a recent glimpse of how the system works. It began earlier this year with a knock on his front door. The visitor was from CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service.
I asked him, why are you here? And that's when he said he was asking about my friend Stefan.
Stefan Christoph.
Yeah.
Stefan Christoph is 29 years old, but he's part of a tradition as old as the idealism that has always motivated radicals. He writes for alternative media, does research for assorted clients. He shows up at demonstrations. He's a veteran of street politics.
They are basically denying the right for people to move freely across national borders.
He supports a wide range of causes very publicly.
Voices must be heard!
That's the whole point of dissent, being seen and being heard, and being fearless.
He says police hit him with a steel baton.
So why would CSIS have to spy on him?
I think that the majority of people in Canada do not agree with a government-funded agency spying on Canadian citizens who are involved in democratic activity, period.
Christophe moved to Montreal 10 years ago. He and Ian Ferrier bonded over music and political causes. What were the questions like?
Well, I guess the one that he kept coming back to is Stefan violent in any way?
Is Stefan violent?
Yeah, that's what.
And your answer was?
Well, I mean, hell, he could babysit my kids. He's not a violent man. He's the opposite of that.
So there's never a moment of doubt, oh my God, I know somebody that I should be worried about?
No, none at all. It was more, I was hurt that he was asking questions about him,
It was the last he'd hear from CSIS, but before the agent went away, he had a quiet warning.
Before he went away, he said, I hope you're going to keep this confidential. And I said, you should have told me that before we had this conversation, because then we wouldn't have had the conversation, And I'm about to phone my friend Stefan, and are they bugging his phone?
It was completely unacceptable what they did. It's something that irks you deeply. When they mention details about your life, intimate details, I think it's quite grotesque, to be honest.
CKUT 90.3 FM, this is World Skip the Beat. It's just after noon.
He would learn that CSIS called on 7 of his friends. Most felt threatened. All but one felt too vulnerable to talk to us about the visits.
On the record, CSIS will always say that you're not obliged to speak to CSIS. But when the agents are in practice, they force themselves, not in a physical way, but you can do a lot of forcing through the tone of your words and your demeanor. And I think they're very well trained in that.
Could this have been the reason for the interest in Christoph? The G20, the economic summit of world leaders in Toronto in late June. This would be one show that Stefan Christoph wasn't going to miss, a rare opportunity for dissent on a global platform. The visits to his friends, the indiscreet inquiries, could have been designed to send a message. We'll be watching you. CSIS has declined to clarify. So CSIS would say, what's your problem? We're just asking questions. Reporters ask questions, you ask questions, you've taken a side in a debate, and we have questions. So?
There are many sides to political debate, but a secret government spy agency shouldn't be a legitimate side to that political debate. I want to live in a society where we discuss issues openly, publicly, right? It makes you angry. And when they start intervening in a way that, you would imagine happened in another era, or it seems like it's from a spy novel.
The best spy stories are the ones we never hear about. Nothing happened. People spied upon our most often none the wiser. But as a boy, Jim Laxer always felt his family was being watched. In time, he forgot about it. Nothing happened. Times changed. Now he knows about the PROFUNC operation and finds himself reliving juvenile anxieties, seeking answers to questions that he couldn't even have articulated more than 50 years ago.
What should we, when we put all those things together, how should we regard what's going on around us now?
I think we got to regard it with very real concern. And I think what we have to do is to try to deconstruct this kind of surveillance state that's being put into place.
He has asked the RCMP, the CIA, and Canada's National Archives for access to files collected in the years of spying on his family. Chances are he'll be in for a long wait. PROFUNC was a 33-year program that monitored tens of thousands of unsuspecting Canadians at unimaginable cost. Officially, it never happened. If you suspect that you or a member of your family might have been a target for detention or even a person of interest under the PROFUNC plan, you can go to our website for information on how to proceed. Or you can go directly to the RCMP, CSIS, or the Canadian Archives with a formal request for access to files. A caution: don't hold your breath while waiting for results.
That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Now, do you think that if they did this in the past, do you think that if they did it in the past, they're not doing it right now? Do you not think that they're watching? Do you not think that they're compiling lists? They just admitted the last, 10 minutes of the broadcast, that all these newer agencies, these federal agencies now all over the place, have lists upon lists. The United States, what do we have here? No fly lists, watch lists. I mean, I'm sure there's lists we don't even know about that people are on. And there will be people that say, well, that they're just keeping us safe. There has to be those lists. Dude, you're on one of those lists too, Have you ever sneezed in the wrong direction or said something that might have been taken the wrong way? Have you ever pissed anybody off? Have you ever been in the system? You got a parking ticket? You're probably on a list. No, they don't do that. Yeah, they do that. They want to catalog and try to... if you look at it like... They look at us like cattle, the powers that shouldn't be. And right now, we're out of control. We're not easy to to keep in rank and file, and people step outside the boundaries. They eat too much, do things they're not supposed to, use too much energy. Now, of course, I'm being a little facetious when I say use too much energy or eat too much, but that's what the powers that shouldn't be think, right? It's a method of control. Having people on lists, having people's names, who should be rounded up, who shouldn't be rounded up, who needs to be watched. All that stuff, lists, compiling that. You can't fly. You've been a bad citizen. That's control. Well, what if they're terrorists, Popeye? How many people are on the no-fly list? And they're like 6-year-old kids. DHS first lied and said that kids weren't even on the list and that wasn't true. And it turns out, no, that there's 6, 7-year-old kids getting on the no-fly list. Can't get them off. One of the kids, her father's a doctor. At least the guy's got resources. He's trying to get his kid off the terror watch list. She's like 5, 6 years old. Last time I checked, they were still trying to fight to get her off because they couldn't get any answers from the government. Good luck getting off a list once you're on it. It's not like you making a list for bread, milk, eggs. This is a list of whose rights are going to get violated, who's going to get rounded up. And then when you start to do things like that, well, then you start to create a climate of fear where people go, I don't want to get pissed off. I don't want to, I've heard rumors that they compile lists. I don't want to end up on a list, so I don't want to rock the boat. So I'm just going to watch Dancing with the Stars. I'll just go along to get along. Another way that it's used to control. We're like out-of-control cattle, like I said. We're running all over the place, and they're trying to get us, they're trying to steer the herd. And at the same time, they're trying to make the herd, trying to figure out how to, make the herd less skittish, I think would be the best way to put it. Because so that way they don't stampede and start running off in all different directions. I think that would be the best word for it, skittish. They get us used to the thunderstorms around us. And they're wrangling us like, we're cows, right, going through the slaughter. That's the way they look at us. They look at us like cattle, the powers that shouldn't be. Why do you think they treat us the way they do? It makes a little more sense, right? Then we start to understand why they talk down to us, exempt themselves from the same laws they want you to be required to follow, right? Because we're cattle to them. To them, they are the herder. If it weren't for them, we would be lost, dumb animals chewing on grass. That's what they think of us. So all this crap is just a method of control. Lists are not a good idea. If you think they are, maybe a to-do list, but not a list of, and I don't care if people say, well, what about terrorists? That's the problem. Who decides who and what is a terrorist? That's a real slippery slope. Anyway, we're going to break. PROFUNC, Canadian martial law plans. If you live in Canada and you haven't heard about it, now you have. Go check it out. Tell others. When we get back, I got something special for you. Stay tuned.
I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible. Where we go from there is a choice I leave to you.
President John F. Kennedy.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Either we heal as a team, or we're going to crumble. Inch by inch, play by play, till we're finished. We're in hell right now, gentlemen, believe me. And we can stay here, get the shit kicked out of us, or we can fight our way back into the light. We can climb out of hell. 1 inch at a time. You know, when you get old in life, things get taken from you. I mean, that's part of life. But you only learn that when you start losing stuff. You find out life's this game of inches. So is football. Because in either game, life or football, the margin for error is so small. I mean, 1/2 a step too late or too early, and you don't quite make it. 1/2 second too slow, too fast, you don't quite catch it. The inches we need are everywhere around us. Hell yeah. They're in every break of the game, every minute, every second. On this team, we fight for that inch. On this team, we tear ourselves and everyone else around us to pieces for that inch. We claw fingernails for that inch. Because we know when we add up all those inches, that's going to make the fucking difference between winning and losing. Between living and dying. I'll tell you this, in any fight, it's the guy who's willing to die who's going to win that inch. And I know if I'm going to have any life anymore, it's because I'm still willing to fight and die for that inch. Because that's what living is. There's 6 inches in front of your face. Now I can't make you do it. You gotta look at the guy next to you. Look into his eyes. Now I think you're gonna see a guy who will go that inch with you. You're going to see a guy who will sacrifice himself for this team because he knows when it comes down to it, you're going to do the same for him. That's a team. And either we heal now as a team, or we will die as individuals.
Ideas are bulletproof.
That's right, ideas are bulletproof, ladies and gentlemen. It's one of my favorite inspirational montages that I've put together for you guys, and I've played that over the course of time. But the other day, I was inspired, and I wanted to make another one. And I'm actually working on a newer, modified version of this one that I just played. But I have something else that I worked on, and I titled it. I actually uploaded it to all my different YouTube channels, and it's up on Federal Jack. It's titled "Think Outside the Box," and this is a little inspirational piece that I worked on. It's about 5 minutes long, but I think you guys will enjoy it. It's got a pretty cool beat behind it, and it's if you listen to the show often, you'll probably recognize it as my ending speech, whatever you want to say, from one of my broadcasts about 2 weeks ago, and I cut some pieces out because it was just what I was talking about was inspirational, and after the show I had wanted to actually just cut that snippet out and make it a shorter video, and then the perfectionist in me was like, no, you can't just do that. If you're going to do it, you gotta clean it up, get rid of if there was a space of like 2 or 3 seconds or pause or whatever, clean anything up, put a beat behind it. And I decided to actually cut it out and spaced it out a little differently, put a pretty cool beat behind it. And I like it. It's inspirational, and I think you will too. I suggest go watch the video too, because the images in the video go right along with what I'm talking about in the audio, but the audio gets the point across. So here you go. This is Think Outside the Box. The only way to get out of this is to think outside the box. You can't fix a problem with the same level of thinking that created it. Everything presented to you is always presented to you as if you're in a box. And if you're standing in this box, you see the walls to your left, you see the walls to your right, you see them in front, you see them in back. If you look down, you see a solid floor because you can feel it underneath your feet. So you don't even bother to think to look up. And the powers that shouldn't be, growing up and through our whole lives, make sure they push that into our face. And they push and they push and they push and they push and they push. And they remind us of their propaganda on a daily basis. You have no power. You have no power. Don't look up. Look to the sides and look down. Don't look up. There's no point. If you look up, you'll only realize how close the ceiling is to you, and you'll feel claustrophobic. So just look straight ahead, or around you, or down. Fear, 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 fear. You need us. You need us. Remember that. You need us. And you never look up. You always look around, look down, and you just assume, hey, they're right. And everything is presented to you in this fashion, that the only solutions are what are presented to you inside this box. And picture the walls of this box like video screens. And all these events happen, you can see things going on. There's really never solutions ever offered. There's never critical thinking offered. There's only one or two options offered. Usually it's A or B, and you have to pick. It gives you the faux choice of picking when both options lead to the same thing. They've been playing this game for a very long time. The way to beat it is to look up. When you look up, you'll realize there is no ceiling. Nothing but blue sky. That'll make your brain say, wow, that's odd. I thought there was a ceiling there. And you suddenly realize that you're not so tiny in this box, but actually you're cramped in there real tight. All squeezed up tight. You feel very constricted. And suddenly you step up. You just stand up straight. And you stretch your body out. You take a big breath. You stretch your muscles out and you hear your bones creaking and cracking. Everything's starting to align itself. And you realize when you clear your eyes and you rub your eyes and you look around you that there's infinite possibility all around you wherever you can see. And when you look down at your feet, you suddenly realize that that box is very, very small. And you were cramped up in there. Where you thought you were standing inside of a large box, you're actually cramped up in there, all squeezed up. But you didn't realize that in reality, because in your mind, they had you thinking you were a very small, powerless individual. When in reality, you're like a colossus. You just stood up out of that box. And it's tiny. It's like a tiny little shoebox now that you're standing in. And then you step outside of that box and you start to look around you and you realize the infinite possibilities around you. And that's when you can actually start to achieve your true potential. That's how they control us. And the way of beating their methods of control is that simple, because once you step outside of that box, ladies and gentlemen, you make them irrelevant. And that's how we win, is by making them irrelevant. They are set and armed and prepped for a physical fight with us. They want us to think that it's either total capitulation or bloody revolution. Again, a choice of only A or B. When in reality, the real choice is to step out of the situation and don't play the game. Period. it's cooler when you can crank it a little louder. It's the background music is set a little low, so I know coming across the radio it comes across a little lower than it actually is. But you don't want to. I wouldn't want to have it too high because then it would drown out the words, which are important because it's actually spurring people to think. Anyway, just something I got inspired the other night after I got off air. I think it was Friday night, if I remember correctly. Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, it was Friday night. I think it was Friday night. Anyway, it was I think it was Friday night. After I got off air, I ended up being up till about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning working on that. Because it takes a while to go edit things up and then do stuff in post-production. Anyway, it's fun. I like doing this stuff, so I'd rather put out positive stuff and inspirational stuff, things that will inspire people with some courage and hope. I mean, the first hour and a half of the broadcast, I spent talking about the police state, martial law plans in Canada, letting you hear about a real program that went on. Lord knows what's going on now. Not if something's going on. There is something going on. Just don't know what it's called. Meet PROFUNC 2, The Revenge of Tyranny, whatever. Right? So since I talk about darker stuff or scary stuff, depressing stuff, intimidating stuff, whatever, the first hour and a half I wanted to get into a little bit of inspirational stuff. The last half hour, I don't like to put out the fear vibe totally with my broadcast. Any of the new listeners that might be just tuning in will learn that. The older listeners understand that. I'm not a fear dude. I don't get off on pimping fear, and I don't make any money doing this. So I don't have a stake in selling you some line of crap or whatever to try to get you to buy a survival seed vault that I sell on my website. You know what I mean? Yeah, I do this because I want to leave a better world than I came into. Now, doesn't mean I plan on leaving this place anytime soon, but when I'm older, I don't want to look back and be like, oh, I should have done something, I could have done something, why didn't I do something? I go to bed at night, I close my eyes, I have no problems falling asleep. I have no problems looking at myself in the mirror because I know I do the right thing. So I like to inspire people to feel the same way and have that same kind of courage. And I find that when I do these inspirational pieces and stuff like that, it usually does help. And having a radio broadcast certainly helps, being able to play them. I'm working on, like I said, a newer piece, but I don't like to. Back in the day, I used to kind of throw stuff together a little faster, and I've become very nitpicky / perfectionist over the years, and that actually has a lot to do with people that I've met along the way that have taught me a lot about audio editing and things like that. And now I've become quite the nitpicker when it comes to audio because I want it to sound good. You know, in my eyes, I know that this stuff is going to be around 20, 30 years from now, and if someone's listening to Bill Cooper stuff from 20 years ago, think about they're going to be listening to our broadcast 20, 30 years from now. And I don't want to have like the crappiest audio or be banging my mic around or anything like that. So yeah, I get a little picky like that. Anyway, I like to play inspirational stuff for you guys. Look, it's not so dark. I believe that there's a way to fix this. If I didn't believe it was, there was a way to fix this, I would tell you that. I would tell you we're screwed. Get your life rafts, we're out. Everybody always says, I'm going to leave the country. Where are you going to go? You think you're freer somewhere else? Oh, yeah, I'm a lot freer. Really, where? Where? Do you have guns? Yeah, I love my guns. You think you're going to take your guns with you when you leave the country? I don't think so. Try it. See what happens. I'm willing to bet unless you got lots of money and you got some pull, you ain't taking your guns with you anywhere. So what are you going to do when you're in that country and say the United States gets overthrown, gets eaten up, thrown to the wolves, and then they turn around and now they're going to come after all the people that are hiding out in the expats in these little countries, and you guys don't have anything to defend yourselves or nobody to, form coalitions or groups with to defend yourselves, except maybe the local islanders, and good luck with that. They'll just park a couple cruise missiles from 50, 60 miles out. there's no choice. It's very simple. We stay. We fight any way we can. We try to fight the info war first. I hate, to use the term, but it is what it is. I mean, even the State Department admitted it when Hillary was in. We're in a war of information. That's what this is all about. That's why they have so much propaganda out there. And this battle is going on. This intellectual battle is going on right now. It's raging. It's like, World War I, II, and possible III all combined into one. The fierceness of the fighting, the things going back and forth. It's just the way it is. You don't realize that, though, because you're used to seeing bullets and bombs and rockets flying back and forth for warfare. That's what they want, though, by the way, the powers that shouldn't be. They don't want a war of information because they're losing it. They can't win a philosophical battle. So they'd rather fight a physical battle. Just remember that. When I say that, people, I've been accused, were you a coward? No. I don't like being goaded into a trap. I use my brain before I fight. I think before I swing. So I can make sure I know where my fist is going to connect and do the most damage. Get it? I don't want to get baited into a trap. I don't like that. I don't want to be I don't want to see this country get baited into a fight. That's what they want. That's why they present you again. It's a choice, right? Illusion of choice. Choice A, total tyranny. We watch everything you do. Choice B, go ahead, try to revolt. We have police state, FEMA camps, martial law, tanks. They don't have to openly say that. I mean, they have, but they don't have to openly say it. You can see it via their actions. So they give you this illusion of choice. I alluded to it in that piece, the faux choice of picking one or the other. How about we don't do A or B? How about there's more options than A or B? How about that? How about we don't have to have tyranny or bloody revolution? There's not that many of them. And if their little minions weren't willing to do what they wanted them to do, then they wouldn't really have any muscle. That's why it pays to sit down with the police and talk to them. If you know a cop or you know someone that works for the government, sit and talk to them. And there are people that think they're doing good or whatever. Well, you're not. But that's why they play us off against each other. That's why they try to get the cops to fight with the civilians to fight with the cops, right? We hate the cops. Cops, civilians are all scum. Right? That's why they do that. Oh, the civilians are turds. Cops are pigs. Keeps a divide. Makes it easier for the cops, or for the people that control the cops, rather, to have the cops go do bad things to the people that they want to subjugate, right? These people play games. I said this on Joe's show. They play things at a level that you can't even contemplate, ladies and gentlemen. They don't look just straight ahead. They think in 3D and 4D, a dimension that you can't even think about, okay? They think on levels. It'd be like if you were inside of an M.C. Escher painting, okay? Like the stairs. That's how these people think. That's how they operate. Okay? Their brains are like the inside of an M.C. Escher painting. So many levels that they think ahead. You have no choice. You have to see this in order to be on the same level playing field that they are. Once you understand this, once you can see it, you can see through their crap much easier. And their methods of control go away instantly. Poof. Good night. That's what happens. And then they're irrelevant. Bye. And then we move on. Humanity. Yay! Problem solved. All right. I'll catch you all again live tomorrow night. If everything goes as planned, I'll have author Steve Alton on for an hour. Go check his series on Megalodon's out. Anyway, I'll catch you all again tomorrow.